Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're taking a deep dive into Nichiren Buddhism.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and specifically some of the challenges it's facing in the 21st century.
Okay.
And our source for this deep dive is an excerpt. It's called "The Challenge of Nichiren Buddhism in the 21st Century."
Yeah, I see.
Have you had a chance to look at that?
Yeah, I've read through it. It's really thought-provoking.
It is. It really is. And it really makes you think about how this tradition, which is based on the teachings of a 13th century Japanese monk and the Lotus Sutra,
Hmm.
it seems to be at a little bit of a crossroads. You know,
Yeah.
can it adapt to our modern world without losing like its core identity?
Right. That's the big question. And the source material, it really dives right into that, outlining five key challenges. And they all kind of highlight this tension between, staying true to the tradition, but also evolving with the times.
Yeah, absolutely. And the first challenge that it brings up, I found really interesting. It's about how some practitioners try to like mimic the actions of Nichiren himself
Uh-huh.
without fully grasping the context of like 13th century Japan.
Mm.
You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
it makes you wonder if that approach could actually do more harm than good.
I think that's a valid concern.
Mm.
You can't just take behaviors from a different era, a different context, and just expect them to work the same way today.
Right.
Imagine trying to solve a modern political conflict using the tactics of like a 13th century warlord.
Right.
It doesn't work.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
wouldn't work. And the source argues that, this kind of blind imitation can lead to a really rigid and dogmatic interpretation of the teachings.
Right.
And that can really alienate people rather than drawing them in.
Right. So it's less about the outward actions
Yeah.
and more about understanding the principles, the deeper principles behind them.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do you actually go about separating, the timeless wisdom from those specific historical circumstances?
Well, consider the fact that Nichiren was exiled for his beliefs.
Right.
So does that mean that modern practitioners should also, seek out persecution?
Right, right.
No, of course not.
Okay.
The true essence of his teachings, it lies in principles like, compassion and wisdom.
Right.
And those are principles that can be, applied in countless ways that are relevant to our lives today.
I see. I see. So, speaking of adapting to modern times, the source also raises this issue of Nichiren Buddhism sometimes feeling, more like a Japanese cultural export rather than like
Right.
a universal practice.
Right. And that's a real challenge, I think. Because you see, there's this inherent tension between honoring the tradition, right, but also making the practice, accessible and authentic for people from different cultures.
Hmm.
The source seems to suggest that striking the right balance there is really key for Nichiren Buddhism to thrive in the 21st century.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
makes me think of those times, when you travel to a new place
Yeah.
and you're trying to really experience the local culture,
Yeah.
but it ends up feeling more like a tourist trap
Right.
than the real deal.
Exactly. And so, how much of what we see in Nichiren Buddhism today is truly essential, and how much of it is, sort of cultural overlay?
Right.
Are there certain rituals or organizational structures that could be, adapted without losing the heart of the practice?
Yeah.
These are questions that the source really encourages us to grapple with.
Okay, so this next challenge is a bit provocative.
Yeah.
I think even a little unsettling, if I'm honest.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's about the potential danger of over-reliance on priests and leaders, within the tradition.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, this is something that I've struggled with in my own, spiritual journey. It's like, isn't having a teacher essential? How are you supposed to learn and grow without guidance?
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, guidance is crucial, absolutely. But what the source highlights is this potential pitfall.
Okay.
What happens when that guidance, morphs into control or even manipulation?
Right.
What if the teacher becomes a barrier between the practitioner and their own, direct experience of the teachings?
Right.
So it's about navigating that fine line between seeking guidance
Right.
but not becoming overly dependent.
Yeah, it reminds me of that saying, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach a man a fish and you feed him for a lifetime.
That's a great analogy. Yeah. And the source is advocating for greater self-empowerment. It
Yeah.
wants to encourage individuals to really cultivate their own inner wisdom. And it ties back to, the message of the Lotus Sutra itself, which really emphasizes the potential for Buddhahood that exists within each person.
Right. So it's not about just blindly following a leader, but
Yeah,
about, tapping into your own potential for enlightenment.
exactly.
Now, this next challenge really piqued my curiosity, because it kind of delves into the philosophical side of things.
Okay.
The source argues that many practitioners um, lack a deep understanding of Tian-tai philosophy, which is like fundamental to Nichiren Buddhism.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, and this is where things get really fascinating because Tian-tai, which was developed centuries ago by a Chinese monk named Zi, it provides like the intellectual and meditative framework for understanding the Lotus Sutra.
Hmm.
And without that, the practice can become really superficial. It's like admiring a beautiful painting without understanding the techniques and emotions behind each brushstroke.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So it's like trying to appreciate a complex piece of music
Right.
without knowing anything about musical theory.
Exactly.
You might enjoy the sound, but you're missing out on a whole layer of depth.
Right. And Tian-Tai's insights into the nature of reality and the path to enlightenment, they really provide that depth and richness that distinguishes Nichiren Buddhism.
Hmm.
You know?
Could you give me an example of how Tian-Kai actually enriches like the understanding of Nichiren Buddhism?
Sure. So consider, the concept of suffering, which is, a central theme in Buddhism.
Hmm.
So Tian-Tai doesn't just tell you that suffering exists. It helps you explore the root causes of suffering, how to transform suffering into wisdom, and how to cultivate genuine happiness.
Right.
And this is all incredibly relevant to, navigating the complexities of modern life.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. Now that you mention it, I've noticed that a lot of mindfulness practices, which are, hugely popular these days, they seem to draw heavily from these ancient Tian-Tai concepts.
Absolutely. And that's what's so exciting, is like we're seeing how these age-old teachings can be, directly applied to the challenges that we're all facing in the 21st century.
Right. So it's not just some dusty old philosophy that's irrelevant to our lives.
Exact.
This is really making me rethink my own understanding of Nichiren Buddhism, I'll tell you.
That's great to hear.
Okay, so the final challenge that the source brings up focuses on the relationship between Nichiren's own writings and the Lotus Sutra itself.
Okay.
Could you elaborate a bit on that?
Sure. So Nichiren's writings, they're known as the Gosho, and they are incredibly valuable. I mean, they offer guidance and commentary on the Lotus Sutra's teachings.
Okay.
But the source cautions against elevating them above the Lotus Sutra itself.
Okay, so because ultimately, like, Nichiren's teachings are meant to be like a guide to understanding the wisdom of the Lotus Sutra.
Yeah, I guess so.
Not a replacement for it.
Exactly. Imagine you have a brilliant teacher and they read a fantastic textbook.
Right.
Right. So the textbook is helpful, but it's meant to lead you to a deeper understanding of the subject matter itself.
Right.
Not to become the sole focus of your studies.
Mm. Yeah.
So it's keeping that focus, right? That focus on the source, the foundational teachings of the Lotus Sutra.
I'm starting to see a recurring theme here.
Yeah, and the source even points out that in some schools of Nichiren Buddhism, this issue is compounded by prioritizing the writings of modern leaders over both the Lotus Sutra and Nichiren's own works.
Oh, wow.
So it becomes like this game of telephone where the original message, gets distorted along the way.
That's fascinating and a little concerning, honestly.
It is. But don't worry, it's not all doom and gloom.
Okay.
The source also offers some really compelling solutions for how Nichiren Buddhism can, adapt and thrive in the 21st century.
Okay, so after exploring all those challenges, I'm definitely curious to hear what the source proposes as solutions.
Yeah.
It's one thing to critique, but it's another to like offer a path forward, right?
Absolutely. And I have to say, the source doesn't disappoint. It calls for a dynamic and reflective approach to the tradition.
Okay.
One that honors its roots, but also embraces evolution.
Sounds promising, but what would that actually look like in practice?
Well, the source outlines 5 key solutions.
Okay.
And first, it emphasizes the importance of contextual understanding, which, we already kind of touched upon. But it's about going beyond simply mimicking Nichiren's actions
Right.
and really understanding the principles behind them, in their historical context.
So not just saying, well, Nichiren did this, so I should too,
Right.
but really figuring out the why behind his actions.
Exactly. Yeah. It's about extracting the timeless wisdom from those specific circumstances. And then the second solution focuses on cultural flexibility, addressing that feeling of Nichiren Buddhism sometimes coming across as more of a, Japanese cultural export than a universal practice.
Right, right. And you were mentioning earlier how that can create this sense of it being like a tourist trap rather
Yeah.
than, the real deal.
Mhm.
So how do you make these teachings resonate with people from different cultures without losing their essence?
Right, right. Well, the source seems to suggest that it's about finding the right balance between honoring the tradition, right?
Right.
But also adapting to fit different cultural contexts.
I see.
Could certain rituals be modified?
Right.
Are there organizational structures that could evolve?
Right.
These are all questions worth exploring.
It's like translating a book,
Yeah.
You don't just translate the words literally yet. You have to convey the meaning and the spirit of the original text in a way that resonates with a new audience.
That's a great analogy. Okay, and then the third solution is all about empowering practitioners.
Okay.
You know?
But isn't that a bit paradoxical?
Mm.
Like if the ultimate goal is individual enlightenment, why the emphasis on sharing the teachings?
Yeah. Right. It's a great question, and it highlights like a really key aspect of Nichiren Buddhism.
Okay.
So, yes, individual practice is fundamental, but it's not meant to be a solitary pursuit.
Okay.
The source argues that by sharing the teachings and supporting each other's practice, we create a collective energy that benefits everyone.
Oh, I see. I see. So it's more like a network of support,
Yeah.
where each individual's journey kind of contributes to the overall enlightenment of the group.
Exactly. It's about fostering a sense of community,
Yeah.
and recognizing that our individual paths are interconnected. The source specifically talks about moving away from that over-reliance on priests and leaders.
That really resonates with me because I mean I've definitely had experiences, where I felt pressure from spiritual teachers to just follow their teachings, that without question.
Right.
And it took me a while to realize that true spiritual growth it comes from cultivating your own inner wisdom, not blindly following someone else.
Mhm.
But how do you balance, that need for guidance, with the importance of self-reliance?
It's a delicate dance. And there's no one size fits all answer.
Right.
The source isn't, advocating for completely abandoning teachers or organized groups.
Sure.
It's more about fostering a healthy balance,
Right.
where practitioners feel empowered to engage with the teachings directly and develop their own understanding.
It's like learning to ride a bike.
Mm-hmm.
You might need someone to like hold you steady at first,
Yeah,
but eventually you have to find your own balance and pedal on your own.
Exactly. And that leads us to the fourth solution, which is all about philosophical depth.
Right, right. And we talked about that earlier, how lack of understanding of Tian-tai philosophy can lead to a superficial understanding of Nichiren Buddhism.
Yeah, and the source argues that a deeper engagement with Tian-tai is crucial for a more nuanced and fulfilling practice. It's interesting, like, how mindfulness is all the rage these days.
Yeah.
Tian-tai was exploring these concepts centuries ago.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
So what can we actually learn from Tian-tai, that's relevant to our lives like today?
Well, for example, Tian-tai, it teaches you how to, observe your thoughts and emotions without judgment,
Okay.
which is incredibly valuable, in today's fast-paced, anxiety-ridden world. It also offers like profound insights into the nature of reality
I see.
and the interconnectedness of all things, which, can help us navigate, complex, ethical challenges.
Okay, so Tian-tai is like the owner's manual for the human mind.
You could say that. It provides the framework for understanding, how our minds work, how to work with our minds and how to tap into our own inner potential.
I'm starting to understand why the source puts so much emphasis on Tian-tai. It's not just some like intellectual exercise. It's a practical guide for living a more meaningful life.
Exactly. And that brings us to the fifth and final solution, which is scriptural balance.
Right, and this goes back to what we were discussing about the relationship between the Lotus Sutra and Nichiren's writings.
Yes, the source it stresses the importance of reaffirming the Lotus Sutra as the foundational text.
Yeah.
So while Nichiren's writings offer valuable insights, they should always be seen as guides and commentaries, not replacements for the Lotus Sutra itself.
So it's like remembering who the head chef is.
Exactly. The Sachiren's writings are like the sous chef.
Yeah.
They're helping to prepare and present the main course, which is the Lotus Sutra itself.
That's a great analogy. It really drives home the point. So those are the 5 solutions: contextual understanding, cultural flexibility, empowering practitioners, philosophical depth, and scriptural balance. It's quite a roadmap.
It is. And what's remarkable is how these solutions, they all seem to support and reinforce each other. They work together like threads in a tapestry, creating a richer and more vibrant picture of Nichiren Buddhism for the 21st century.
So it's not just about picking and choosing which solutions we like. It's about embracing a holistic approach that integrates all these elements.
Precisely. And that's where things get really interesting. How do we take these ideas and translate them into action?
Right.
How do we create a Nichiren Buddhism that's both authentic to its roots and relevant to our modern world?
It's amazing to think about how like all these seemingly separate challenges and solutions, they're actually like deeply intertwined.
Yeah.
It's like they form this network. They support each other, strengthen each other, and it creates a more vibrant and relevant Nichiren Buddhism for the future.
It's not about, dismantling the tradition, but about, finding ways to make it resonate with the complexities of our modern world.
And the source actually uses a really powerful phrase to describe this.
Yeah.
It calls for thoughtful evolution. I love that
Yeah.
because it really captures the essence of what we've been discussing. It's not about clinging rigidly to the past. It's about finding ways to make these ancient teachings meaningful in the present.
Exactly. And it goes on to say that Nichiren Buddhism can and should be a living practice that honors its roots while blossoming in the modern age.
That's a beautiful image. So where do we go from here?
hmm
How do we actually put these ideas into action?
Well, the source offers a starting point.
Okay.
It says, this begins with each practitioner accepting and believing that they are, in fact, a bodhisattva of the earth, from chapter 15 of the Lotus Sutra.
Bodhisattva of the earth. Could you break that down for us? I'm not sure I fully grasp what that means.
Of course. So in Mahayana Buddhism, a bodhisattva is someone who is dedicated to achieving enlightenment, but for the benefit of all beings.
I see.
So they postpone their own full awakening to help others on their paths. And chapter 15 of the Lotus Sutra, it describes countless bodhisattvas emerging from the earth, and this is a symbol of the potential for Buddhahood that exists within every being.
So the source is suggesting that every practitioner of Nichiren Buddhism has this incredible potential for compassion, for wisdom.
Yes. And it challenges us to recognize and cultivate that potential. And the source goes on to say that an equal part of our practices is sharing the Lotus Sutra and the phrase Namu Myoho Renge Kyo with others.
Now, I've heard that phrase before, but could you remind me what it means and why it's so important in Nichiren Buddhism?
Sure. So Namu Myoho Renge Kyo essentially means devotion to the mystic law of the Lotus Sutra.
Okay.
And it encapsulates the essence of Nichiren's teachings, and it's believed to connect practitioners to the transformative power of the sutra.
So it's not just about chanting like words. It's about aligning yourself with these really profound teachings.
Exactly. And the source emphasizes that it's not just about practicing for ourselves.
Yeah.
It says not just practicing for ourselves, also practicing for others. And it highlights the importance of sharing the teachings and helping others connect with their own innate potential for enlightenment.
That makes me think about the concept of interconnectedness. like how our individual actions and choices can ripple outwards and affect those around us.
Yeah, that's a great insight. And the idea of interconnectedness is central to Buddhism. It emphasizes that we're all part of this larger web of life, and our actions have consequences that extend, far beyond ourselves.
This has been a really, really eye-opening conversation. I feel like I'm starting to grasp the depth, the complexity of Nichiren Buddhism in a way I hadn't before.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you. And I think, the most important takeaway is this, that that Nichiren Buddhism, like any living tradition, it must evolve to stay relevant.
Right, right.
And that evolution requires a delicate balance, of respecting the past and embracing the future.
It's about finding that sweet spot where tradition and innovation can coexist,
Yeah.
where ancient wisdom can speak to modern challenges.
And ultimately, it's about empowering individuals to connect with their own innate potential
Right.
for compassion, for wisdom, for courage, and to use that potential to create positive change in the world.
It's an inspiring vision. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I encourage you to reflect on what we've discussed today.
Yeah.
How can you embody these principles in your own life?
Yeah.
How can you contribute to a more compassionate and understanding world?
And how can you share, the wisdom that you've gained with others, helping them to blossom on their own spiritual journeys? That's a question worth pondering. And I hope this deep dive has provided you with some valuable insights and inspiration to do just that. Until next time.